Hello Tech Pros, episode 268.
So use strategic procrastination to your advantage and find the right mixture of whatever it is, like the right people on the team.
Welcome to the podcast where we explore the opportunities, challenges, and anxieties that technical professionals and techpreneurs face when building their career, building their products, and building their business. This show is about the people behind technology and the mindsets and skill sets they developed that led to their success. You can learn more about this podcast and our guests at hellotechpros.com and about overcoming social anxiety at anxietynerd.com. All right, let's get started. Hello Tech Pros, this is Chad Bostic, and I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today, George Mocharko. Hey George, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great, Chad. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm so excited to get to talk to you again because we haven't spoken since I met you at Podcast Movement way back in the day in 2016.
Back in the day, good times then. How was Podcast Movement for you? Did you find that it was successful? Did it help create some leads and business contacts for you?
Well, absolutely. We're sitting here talking today, aren't we? For me, it was a blast because I had just launched my podcast. I had just launched Hello Tech Pros on April 4th, 2016. And then Podcast Movement was, July? Like mid-July, something like that?
That's right.
And I was such a noob. I still consider myself such a noob, even though we're recording episode 260 something today, 68. I think this is 268.
Wow, congrats, man.
Thank you. It was such a huge, awesome experience. If anybody out there, including a lot of my listeners I know have contacted me about how to start their own podcast, I highly recommend Podcast Movement. So if you're listening to this in early 2017, it's going to be in Anaheim this year. I'm going to be there. George, are you going to be there as well?
I'm actually looking at speaking at Podcast Movement this year.
Nice.
So yes, and Anaheim's a great city. I've been there for conferences in the past. It's a really great place. Definitely the hub of what people are doing with podcasting in North America. So it's well worth your time to attend.
Absolutely. There's so many awesome speakers and attendees, and I learned so much actually just from talking to the other attendees. And some of the attendees you just bump into like, hey, how's it going? Who are you? And it's like, hey, I'm George and I'm doing all this stuff. And it's fantastic to meet George. And it was fantastic to meet all these other amazing people that you just kind of bump into that are either producing podcasts and have been doing it for years and years and years, or just getting started somewhere in between. So I highly recommend that. But let me introduce you to the audience, George. George Mocharko, I'm killing it. Mocharko is a writer, editor, communication consultant based in Washington, D.C. metro area. As principal of Geotech Consulting, he helps create crafted strategic messaging for small businesses, startups, trade associations, nonprofits, and NGOs. Geotech specializes in publication management, professional quality newsletters, magazines, collateral material for all types of organizations. And George, when I met you at Podcast Movement, there was, that conference room floor, like it was a buzz. Everybody was talking and busy and stuff. And I heard you say Geotech, and for some reason I was thinking at the time when you first introduced yourself, I was thinking like, geospatial technologies, right? So like mapping and plotting people and places and things on a map and stuff like that. And then you actually explain, no, you're actually in the tech space, but on technical writing. And Geotech's just the name of the company, but you actually are in the tech space to help people with like technical documentation and communication around their business and their products, so that, tech people like us, like our listeners, can understand what it is the heck that it's supposed to do. But then real world, like normal business users that don't know the tech jargon that sometimes we speak in our world, take some of that out so that normal everyday people can consume those documents as well.
Yeah, that's correct. And leave it to a technical writer to create a business name that actually sounds like something that is a very specific industry. Yeah, Geotech consultants, they will actually come out to construction projects, and they'll do, before engineers come into the fold, they will actually do an analysis of ground soils, sometimes concrete materials, to find out how builders can go up. So yeah, there are geotechnical engineers out there, but Geotech Consulting, the business, Geo comes from my first name, GEO, George, and then tech is from the tech rating side of things. And you're right, tech writers are kind of the bridge between the IT folks and telling people how to use their software, their systems, and their architecture.
And it is such an underappreciated profession, in my opinion, because if you've ever watched that 1990s movie Office Space, right? And the guy's just raging and his head's about to explode because he's like, I talk to the people. I'm a people person, right? And he explains to the developers what they're supposed to be working on. And that's kind of a big meme and joke in my world. But it's true. Like, there is a huge communication gap between some business people and some technology people because we all have our own jargon. We all have our own ways of solving problems. We all have our terminology that we use for whenever we're talking about a problem or solution or a piece of technology. And it can really get confusing when you think you're talking about something like geotechs that are going to come out before construction, and then you actually find out that you're talking about something completely else. And then it's like, oh wait, we were having a completely different conversation for the last 20 minutes. Hang on, let me back up and do this all over again.
Yeah, it's right. And I think one thing that makes technical writers kind of underappreciated is because their work is mainly invisible. You don't think about the authors that create a guide for you to set up, something in your office system. You don't think about the documentation that you have that you consult when you're getting computers out of the box. You don't think about these things, and tech writers do have to think about these things. So a lot of it is being able to be very specific about procedures, about how things are done. A lot of times in the industry, people are going straight to the manufacturer so they can get the technical specs. Think about any kind of computer or tablet or phone, iPhone, Samsung device, whatever you have. If you go to their website, they're going to have a tech specs page, and there's a technical communicator there that has to go and confirm all the data in there to make sure that that information is accurate and specific. So that's really what we do. My last job as a tech writer, I was working for a DoD IT program at the Pentagon, and my work there was working with a group of people to create an architecture system for one of the programs there. And so there's a team of people that do documentation work. I was a documentation specialist. So there's a great need for technical writers in these types of roles: technical writers, technical editors, technical communicators.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge need. But sometimes, especially in this world of agile development and agile methodologies that we have these days, where people want to build a minimum viable product. They want a proof of concept. They just want to iterate on it. And that is a completely different structure from the old waterfall days where you build the documentation first and then build the product. Now it's about building the product when we don't have a clear idea of what the product end result is going to be. We know we want to add some value. We know we want to hit some goals, but we don't know exactly how the software, how the program, how the device or whatever it is going to work until we start building it, iterating it, giving it to people to use and test, getting feedback. And so I would imagine that what you've seen in that space is maybe the documentation is written in a different time frame in those projects than in other projects?
Yeah, the time frame depends. It varies, really. A lot of times documentation also depends on, the sense of urgency behind some part of the project. Whenever the customer needs to have something immediately, obviously you drop everything and get to it. But I will say this: you're accurate whenever it comes to, getting the right information out. The main part of the work that people don't really think about whenever you're working with a technical writer, technical editor, is that there's a lot of facilitation that has to happen. And thanks to Scrum and Agile, we can have these meetings where we are working as part of teams, and you have engineers sitting there right next to people that are actually working with who the end user is going to be, as well as the customer. And everybody's at the same table. And you have this conversation where you try to elicit the information from engineers. And let me tell you this: eliciting information from engineers can be an arduous process because engineers like to speak at length about whatever it is that they know. These are highly brilliant, highly intelligent folks that really don't understand how to have syntax or sentence structure whenever they speak a lot of times.
Guilty
yeah.
right here.
So a lot of it comes down to us being able to, translate what they're saying. And I'll be honest here, a lot of times there's a lot of technical terminology that they use that I just don't know. But I know if I can jot it down and look it up later and then find out what that is, I can get to it. And I can find out how to translate what they need to the customer or to the user or somebody else. So it's really part of being a technical writer is also part of being an engineer. We're engineering words. We're engineering information so we can do value engineering in a sense to get that information out with the least amount of words as possible, right? So when we're communicating something, we want to make sure that it's understandable. Now, it all depends upon what the customer's goals or the client's needs are. So in a lot of cases, people need to have documentation that runs at length. And these can be, 50 to 100-page manuals or brochures or whatever it is. These documents, these white papers, whatever it is, these things need to be understood in a second. So, because a lot of times people might have a PDF in front of them, but they're not going to read the whole thing. They're going to go to that executive summary. They're going to read that encapsulated version of what the project or the program is about. And they're going to say, okay, I get this. But if I need to get more information, I know where to go to. So that also, is part of a technical communicator's job, is to get the information organized correctly so they know what page to jump to or where to look in the document for information about that. I've been doing this for quite a while. Some of the documents I've done have been emergency management systems for wastewater treatment plants. Some of them have been software tests for internal IT organizations. Sometimes they've been handbooks that need to go out to customers that are looking for detailed information about how to implement educational curriculum. Was that your phone?
Yeah, sorry. Keep going.
Okay, that's all right. So really, these kind of things are very important documents, and it's my job and all technical communicators' jobs to get this information out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you've ever been in a situation where maybe you're the newbie on the team, you're just coming into the team for the first time, or you're taking over a legacy project that is in production or installed somewhere, and you need to do maintenance on it, or you need to do upgrades on it, or you need to service it, or you need to you're a user of it, or you're the manager or supervisor of the users who use it, and all of a sudden something's not working as expected. And it's like, okay, where do I go? Who do I call? What do I do? And the first thing that I do is kind of look up some information about it. Hey, what is this? Is this normal? Do we need to reset it? Do we need to restart it or whatever? But as a new person on a new project, I have been floored by kind of not necessarily, in some cases, the lack of documentation. In other cases, the quality of the documentation and the obscurity of the documentation. Like you said before, the executive summaries, right, where there was no executive summary. There was hundreds and hundreds of pages of very, very technical things about how this deal worked, and it had some sort of project code name, Blackbriar or something like that. And you're okay, it's the Blackbriar system. What does it do? Well, it's got 48 petabytes of memory. Okay, well, what does it do? Well, it uses, certain types of technology to send data back and forth across the wire. Okay, great. What does it do? And you're reading page after page after page and flipping through the manual trying to figure out, okay, now here's an architect diagram that shows where it's stored on disk and how it, sends it to memory and then how the users interact with it. But still, it's not answering my question. What does the Blackbriar system do? I have no idea. And so you're talking to people across the company and they're trying to explain it, but it's just not clear. And so those executive summaries, like you said, George, are absolutely critical in all situations, just to let's pick something up, let me know what it is, and then if I have further questions, then I can dive deep into the weeds of all that technical jargon.
Yeah, it's exactly about that. And, a big part of being a technical writer and technical communicator is making it so that the documents are accessible to really anyone that picks it up. this is something that everybody has to be on the same page about. So when somebody has that particular document in their hands, they have to be able to know how to get that information. And if they're not able to do that, I would suggest that organizations, enterprises do this. They work with knowledge management systems. And knowledge management systems can be anything from a shared database to an online repository where you have information, towards even marketers that have to have information that they use for products, like technical specs in their marketing. And this has to be shared in some kind of database where everybody has access to that whenever they're talking about the product. So a big part of being a technical communicator is making sure that there's that accessibility of documents. One thing I don't hear enough technical communicators talk about is UX, user experience. And that seems to be something that people talk about products whenever you're talking about a product that's sold, right? But documentation is also a product. And we don't necessarily think of it as a product, but it is a product. And if you want to have people step away from your document after they've read it or glanced at it, you have to have something that they kind of take away from that document. And it has to be something important. It has to have something that they get out of that. Otherwise, they're just going to forget about it and it's going to sit somewhere like in a pile of paper somewhere. So for documentation, I highly recommend that people that do work with tech writers have them think about who the end user is. And then through design thinking, through these kind of iterative processes, think about what people are going to be taking away from this document. I know a lot of times like people think, okay, all this documentation stuff is boring. There's a lot of boring information on there. But there's a reason it's gathered and collected and aggregated and sorted out and there for people to access because it's important for some part of the project or the program. So it's important to have it accessible enough, I think, in the beginning. But I think that document design has to begin with the very basic nature of what something is, like you said with the Blackbriar project. If someone wants to take away what is this, they have to get that up front and instead of having to dig through like all these details and go right into the weeds to find out like that information. You have to have that document designed so the important information is up front. And then if people want more information, they can go to the next document. So even if you're structuring a website where there's PDFs on there, you want to have this kind of like a Russian nesting dolls. You know, like the most important information is going to be up front, and then all the information inside that's less important, you can get to that as soon as you open that nutcracker open. Those kind of things, that kind of document design, I think that helps the user tremendously.
Man, I love that. I love that. That it's about the UX of the documentation. I have never thought of a need for UX and documentation or how documentation is a product in and of itself. You know, I always think of, in the past, I'm very guilty of thinking of documentation as a byproduct of some other product, right? So you create a product, and not that documentation is waste, but documentation is just kind of a helper tool that goes along with it, or something that's required to get, honestly, from a developer standpoint, to get your product into production, right? You have to have documentation, so you farm it out to somebody to do, like yourself, right? But I've never thought of documentation being a product in and of itself. So I'll tell you what, George, in just a moment, I want to ask you about how we can go forward in our own projects and really think about documentation as a product that needs to have its own UX when we're starting the design of some physical product or some software product. Also think about the design of the documentation product as well. But first, we'll take a quick break and thank our sponsors. This episode of Hello Tech Pros is sponsored by you, the audience. Instead of looking for new corporate sponsors, I've decided to adopt a pay-per-value model. What that means is you decide on how much I get paid. If you're just browsing and have yet to get value out of the show, don't feel obligated to pay a darn thing. However, if this podcast does its intended job of helping you build your career, build your products, or build your business, consider becoming a sponsor on Patreon. Pick the level of recurring donation that matches the level of value you get out of this show, or make a one-time sponsorship for that big aha moment that have helped turn things around for you. Become a sponsor today at patreon.com/hellotechpros or visit hellotechpros.com/sponsor. Okay, we're back with George Mocharko. George helps create authentic, crafted, strategic messaging for small businesses because he's a documentation expert. Basically, what he does is takes all the mumbo-jumbo jargon BS that we technical professionals talk about and turn that into, grammatically correct, structured documentation that people can actually read and understand. And so he's got a lot of tips and tricks about how to take all that jargon and not just make it into proper English or proper whatever language of choice you're in, but structure it in a way that it has good user experience. And the documentation itself is a product, much like your piece of software or your piece of hardware or whatever it is that you're building is a product. So George, if we're going into some design of some system, right? Let's say I'm building an app. So Chad's building a mobile app, and I got this idea, and I want some developers to start building it for me, and so forth. At what point do I start thinking about the documentation as another product as well? And then we'll dive in a little bit, as much time as we have, into what's the process, the best process to go about making sure that we design that documentation product, like you said, with the most effective UX as possible.
Right. I think you need to start thinking about documentation from the very inception. You have to, because it is a requirement of most contracts. It is a requirement of any kind of product development that you have documentation. So thinking about documentation from the get-go helps you get this out of the way later. And I think you hit upon something whenever you're doing the intro just after the break that a lot of people think documentation is. This is just some BS that we need to give the client so that we can get to this next stage. And it's not. This isn't just some BS that you give to the client. This is very important information. And I think if more organizations would look at it like that and say, no, we have to have this core information that fulfills requirements because by our contract, we have to do this. We need to think about documentation from the very beginning. And thinking about documentation from the very beginning sets you up for success because you don't have a whole bunch of engineers scrambling to write something where already there's been 10 or 15 PMs that have cycled through the program, and no one knows anything about the legacy of the project, and you have no institutional knowledge or institutional memory of what happened. That's what documentation does. This is the baton that you hand off to the next person. You might not be the next contractor working on that if you don't get a rebid. So sometimes people think of it as, oh, we're being competitive here, that we're not giving them our information. They think of their information as proprietary. But once you've created documentation, there's a reason that is something you need to fulfill with your contract, is because the customer wants it and it's needed to be there for the legacy of the program or the project. So if people would think about it from the very inception, whenever they start doing those facilitation meetings with engineers, they would start looking at, okay, we've written a bunch of things down on the whiteboard. We've captured this information. Once we've captured that information, we need to organize this information. But if we think about we need to organize this information from the very get-go, then you have an organization to the questioning process, the structured process of how you elicit information from your engineers, from your technical experts. These subject matter experts are the ones that are going to be able to design whatever it is that you're creating. You're talking about the design document. These designers are going to be coming up with that in the meetings. And yes, meetings go on very long, and there's a lot of extraneous, unnecessary information. The documentation specialist's job is to capture that information, sort it out, collect it, and then redistribute it back to people on the team so that everybody on the team is in agreement. Think of that information as a contract between the team. What do we want to build? What does success look like? We need to answer those questions. Every time there's a new document, and you'll see in a lot of technical documentation, they do it numerically, 1.1, 1.2, or version number 1, version number 2 of this document. When you look at those documents, there's an ordered process to those so that you know what stage in the game you are. And especially with the design phase, when people are in the design phase, this is a whole team of engineers that are saying, okay, we kind of have an idea of like what the product's going to be, but how do we build it, right? What is it going to look like? We know kind of how to build some things, but the design means that we might have to build this in a different way entirely. And if you're thinking about design, a lot of places don't think about design. They try to not reinvent the wheel. They try to say, well, this is how a project or program or product looked in the past, so therefore we can just do this. Mm-hmm. This is where you need to really have innovation. So if you have people on your team that are innovators, and a lot of people in IT now have chief innovation officers. If you have that chief innovation officer there from the inception, they can help guide the process. And in that process, they're able to help guide whatever the outcome of those meetings is, so that there's an end game in play, so that design has something that can be built. Because when it comes to design, we're thinking about either a product or a service or something, either tangible or intangible, that needs to be defined in those meetings. And if you don't have someone capturing that information, you're really not going to have success.
Yeah, those meetings can be so confusing, right? Because in the space of innovation, right, in the space of designing something new, even if it's just kind of redoing the same project that we did 2 years ago, but now 2 years later, things have changed. Like cultures have changed, people on the team have changed, technologies and tools available to us have changed. So there will be innovation on every project. There will be something new and different. And when that happens, all that discussion about how the new and different and what's new and different and how are we going to do this, what's not just what the process that we're going to use to build it, but the components that we're going to use, the process that we're going to use, the people and the roles that are going to do different things, like who's going to approve things, who's going to make decisions on things, how they're going to make decisions on things, if we're going to use multiple different components and test them and see which one works, right? All of that stuff happens in a meeting kind of in real time, or it happens at people's cubes and desks in real time, and then people get together and discuss them in a meeting. And I've seen over and over and over again, the problem with horrible meetings is that we're having the same meeting 20 times this year.
Right.
Like we've literally had the same meeting every 2 weeks for the last year, because we talk about it, we discuss it, we think that we have our action items or our results out of that meeting, and then we go away and we come back 2 weeks later, and it's like we have to rediscuss everything that we've already just discussed before. So George, exactly. I love what you said before about the documentation specialists. Their job is to capture that knowledge, like aggregate everybody's knowledge together, sort it out, and then redistribute it back to the team to say, hey, this is what the team as a whole decided. This is what we agreed upon. And then we have, I'm so sorry, we have phones blowing up left and right here. Then once we have all that knowledge, we capture it, we aggregate it, we redistribute it back to the team, then we can agree on that, and we can read it, and we could glance at it, and maybe not just every meeting has an executive summary, but we have this live document that's growing and evolving that has all the things in it that we've already addressed, so that we don't need to go back someday in the future and readdress them.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I do want to emphasize is that I think it's important for organizations to have somebody that understands technical communication, somebody that's in that role that has a background of technical writing or technical editing. And the reason for that is because I think a lot of teams will throw someone into the role that doesn't have that background or experience. They'll throw like the receptionist in there. I've seen it happen, believe me. And they're, because they've taken notes during a meeting, all of a sudden they're the scribe, and they're going to sit there and basically take down the details of something that's a very highly technical project or program. And their unfamiliarity with the outcomes and kind of the responsibility about their role makes it so that you're going to fail in that regard. So I would say for everybody that has a technical person on their team that also needs to do writing or editing, You need to designate that role from the inception. And I know we work, in Scrum and Agile, and we say, hey, there's kind of overlapping roles. I've seen so many engineers do the technical writing and editing side of things where you're just getting the wrong things down. And that's fine. Sometimes you need to have that subject matter expert, the SME, get something down because, technical writers don't know everything. They know something about a specific field, whether it's healthcare or IT or some kind of enterprise sector, like in the legal world. They have very specific knowledge about a certain area, but they don't know everything. And so it's important for people to have that role designated up front, just so that you're not burdening an engineer or a systems architect or even the project manager or the program manager, God forbid, because they don't want to do that. They've got so many things that they have to do. So I'm a member of the Society for Technical Communication, STC. If you have people on your team, I would highly urge them to go to stc.org. That is the organization for technical communicators. There's tools and resources on there. There's training. They have a body of knowledge that they've been working on, which is similar to like you have project managers that do the PMP certification, right? So they don't have a certification yet. I think they're still working on that, but they do have the aggregated knowledge for technical communicators that they can go to and find out what they need to know to do their jobs effectively. So have your people trained as technical writers, as technical editors, and technical communicators, because it's important for the success of the project or the product or the program.
Fantastic. I love it. Great advice, George. Thank you so much for joining me on Hello Tech Pros and talking about this, because in my mind, like I said before, technical writing, technical documentation is an deserving. It's a field that we need more people and recognize in, right? So there's so much about it that is misunderstood in the tech industry. Dude, I am guilty. I'm the biggest jerk of technical documentation ever on many projects that I've worked on before, and I have a lot of regrets about. You know what? It could have been a lot smoother had we had the right person with the right training in this position to help us out and make it a lot more smooth. So thanks so much for sharing. Before we go, can you share any parting words of wisdom that you have for our audience, and then the best way that we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yes, I would like to say that this is important for anyone working in IT or really any field. I think a lot of times professionals think that they can get their work done between the hours of 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Mm-hmm. And I think what we found with the age of the internet and the technology that we have here, it's not about time management so much as it is about energy management. And when we were talking about having these meetings that go on and on and on, those are a drain. Those are a drain on team morale. They're a drain on the success of the product or the project. They're a drain on resources. You're paying everybody to be there. So I would say that people need to think about time management when it comes to creating a product and creating a successful outcome for whatever it is that they're working on. And think about the energy of the team. And sometimes you need to re-energize teams by taking them out of the context of being in the boardroom talking about something. Maybe take them to a different space to talk about the subject. Maybe have an event like at a bar some night so you can get kind of people's frank opinions about something, about the status of the project. These things help with team building and help with bonding and help create the bonds that people are able to do to solve these problems. So I would say look at energy management and think about the energy of the teams that you work with and try to cater to these. Try to cater to the different communication styles that people have. People are visual learners. People are spatial learners. People are either auditory or tactile learners. Think about who you're communicating with too, because that can help become very successful when you're trying to persuade someone about the outcome of what you think success looks like. And the last thing I would say too, and this is probably going to go against the grain of a lot of professionals that talk about time management, is use something called strategic procrastination to your advantage. Now, most people don't know what strategic procrastination is. They know what procrastination is. They know that
I've
they're
been
going to get
practicing
to it
that all
later.
my life.
Yeah. So Adam Grant, he has a book called Originals, and he has a chapter in there talking about this concept of strategic procrastination. And okay, by all means, we think procrastinators are people that just put off things until like they finally just get it done. But what that really is, that's part of your energy management for the work that you're doing. And sometimes you really need to have the right circumstances happen before you can have all these other magical kind of things happen with what you're working on. And so I would suggest people look at, delaying those conversations in the meetings whenever people are just feeling a drain on them and saying, nope, we're not going to get to this today. We're going to stop right here. Hard stop on the nose and not discuss this until the next meeting. Schedule your time effectively so that you talk about that at the next meeting, because otherwise you're just going to be rehashing the same things over and over and over again. So use strategic procrastination to your advantage and find the right mixture of whatever it is, like the right people on the team, the right timing of the day. People will try to make things happen before the deadline of a project. A lot of times that happens in proposal management. They have like this hard and fast deadline that they need to get it in by. And, sometimes the proposal is due at some strange time, like midnight on a Friday. Well, don't have your teams grinding away working on Friday. They want to be home with their families. They want to be going out. So don't do that to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People don't like Mondays. You were talking about Case of the Mondays from Office Space. Don't work on Mondays. Don't have your team meet on Mondays. Work when the energy is there. And I guarantee you, when you have everybody spirited and enjoying the process, that you're going to have a very successful outcome.
Awesome. Great stuff, George. Thanks so much. Where can we get a hold of you if we want to find out more about you and about Geotech Consulting?
So my company is geotechconsulting.com. You can go to my website. It's Geotech Consulting, GEOTECH consulting.com, and you'll find about me. You'll find out about what things I do. I do a lot of marketing, communications plans, digital marketing, of course, publications and publication management, and a lot of behind-the-scenes kind of work that most of your communications people do. And then I also have a podcast that I do, which is how I met Chad, obviously, because we're both at Podcast Movement, which is called DC Entrepreneur. And DC Entrepreneur, I started in October of 2015, and you can get episodes of that on SoundCloud.com. And if you go to SoundCloud/DC-entrepreneur, you'll have all the episodes of the different tech entrepreneurs in the Washington, D.C. area that I've interviewed.
Awesome. Go check it out. And if you missed all those links, you can go to hellotechpros.com/268. That's hellotechpros.com/268. You get access to the show notes page here with all of the links and the information that George and I have been talking about it. George, thank you so much once again for joining me on Hello Tech Pros. It was great to catch up with you. It's been way too long. I love chatting with you. We had a little bit of this conversation at Podcast Movement, but not enough. So this was fantastic. And for me, it's very, very timely because I've got some projects in the works that I'm not ready to announce yet, but I absolutely need to start thinking about the documentation for them right now instead of when it's time to release or when it's time to go to beta or when it's time to, hit some other milestones. So thank you so much for joining me and talking about it.
Thanks for having me, Chad.
You bet. Tech Pros, if you are in a situation where you've got really crappy, horrible documentation, maybe it's because nobody on the team is thinking of it as a first-class product. Maybe you're thinking of it as a waste product or a byproduct or some stage gate thing that we need to have. And like George was saying, that's not the case. I would challenge you to go back to your project teams and challenge them or challenge yourself to really step up the bar for technical documentation. Think about all the things that George has been teaching us here today about the UX of documentation, about kind of the taxonomy and the structure of the documents, how to find the right words or the right pictures or the right organization for the right audience. And I think the quality of your product is going to go up as well as the documentation. You've been listening to Chad Bostic and George Mocharko. And until next time, take care. The show notes page for this episode can be found at hellotechpros.com/268. Do you use Slack for team communication? Join the Hello Tech Pros Slack channel at hellotechpros.com/Slack. If this episode helped you out in any way, please leave a review on iTunes and let me know what you thought. iTunes reviews helps our rankings, which helps us grow the Hello Tech Pros podcast to a broader audience, which helps more technical professionals and techpreneurs build their career, build their products, and build their businesses. If you are a subscriber and get repeat value out of this show, consider becoming a sponsor on Patreon. The information on this podcast is free to everyone, but I'm giving you the opportunity to pay for the value you get out of it, starting as little as $1 a month. Pledge your support today at patreon.com/hellotechpros or visit hellotechpros.com/sponsor.